When Rush announced their return to the stage, one question immediately dominated the conversation. How do you recreate the sound of Rush without Neil Peart? For decades, Neil Peart's drums were not just part of the band's music, they were one of the defining voices of Rush. His massive drum setups, precise timing, powerful fills, and unique approach shaped the sound fans knew around the world. After Peart passed away in 2020, many wondered if Rush would ever perform again. Then came the unexpected announcement. Rush would return with German drummer Anika Nilles behind the kit for the 50-something tour. But bringing in a new drummer created a challenge that went far beyond learning songs. Because Rush's sound engineers weren't simply trying to make a drummer sound good. They were trying to balance two completely different worlds. On one side was the legendary sound fans had known for over 40 years, the huge, detailed, almost orchestral drum sound of Neil Peart. On the other side was Anika Nilles, a drummer with her own style, her own touch, and her own musical personality. She had already built a reputation through her solo work, teaching, and performances, including work connected with Jeff Beck. The biggest challenge? Making sure fans could still feel the spirit of Rush while allowing Anika to sound like herself. This was not about creating a copy of Neil Peart. Even Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson understood that replacing Neil was impossible. They needed someone who respected the original arrangements but could bring new energy to the music. And that meant every detail mattered: the drum sizes, the cymbals, the microphones, the mix in the arena. Because when a drummer changes, the entire sound of a band changes. And for Rush's crew, the mission was clear: capture the power fans loved without trapping Anika inside the shadow of the past. But the real surprise came when the engineers discovered that Anika's biggest strength was also their biggest challenge. Her sound was different. For Rush's sound team, the first major challenge was understanding one simple fact. Anika Nilles does not play the drums the way Neil Peart played them. And that was exactly why they chose her. Neil Peart's style was built around incredible precision, complex arrangements, and a signature sound that became instantly recognizable. His massive drum kit allowed him to create layers of sound, almost like multiple instruments happening at the same time. But Anika brought something completely different. Her playing style is more fluid, expressive, and dynamic. She is known for her powerful grooves, unusual rhythms, and ability to move between intense technical playing and musical feel. Instead of trying to recreate every movement Neil made, Anika approached the songs with respect while adding her own interpretation. For the engineers, that created a difficult balancing act. They had to make sure the audience heard the classic Rush experience, the huge drum presence that fills an arena, while also preserving the natural character of Anika's playing. A drummer's sound is not only created by the drums themselves. It comes from the way they hit the drums, the strength of their attack, the timing, and even the small differences between one player and another. That means the same drum kit can sound completely different in the hands of two different musicians. And Rush's crew had decades of history to protect. Fans were not just listening for beats, they were listening for memories. Every drum fill in songs like Tom Sawyer, The Spirit of Radio, or YYZ carries emotional weight because those moments were connected to Neil Peart's performances for generations of fans. So the engineers had to avoid one dangerous mistake, making Anika sound like she was simply imitating someone else. The goal was not to create a Neil Peart replacement. The goal was to create a new chapter of Rush. That meant adjusting everything around her, from the microphone setup to the live mix, so her strengths could come through. And according to early reactions from fans, something unexpected happened. Instead of focusing only on what was missing, many listeners started noticing what Anika was bringing to the stage: her energy, her confidence, her own musical voice. But behind the scenes, the biggest technical challenge was still waiting, because Rush's music was never built around a simple drum sound. It was built around a drummer who could make an enormous kit feel like a full orchestra. And now the engineers had to figure out how to make Anika's unique style create that same feeling in front of thousands of fans. The deeper the Rush crew went into preparing for the tour, the clearer the challenge became. This was not just about making the drums louder. It was about making the drums feel powerful enough to carry the history of the band. Rush's live sound had always depended on a special relationship between the three members. Geddy Lee's bass, Alex Lifeson's guitar, and Neil Peart's drums created a musical balance where every part had room to breathe. When Anika Nilles stepped into that role, the engineers had to find a new balance. Her playing style changed the way the entire band interacted. Neil Peart was famous for his detailed, carefully arranged drum parts. His playing often filled every space with complex patterns and dramatic accents. Anika, while also highly technical, brings a different type of movement and feel. Her approach can be more groove-focused, with different ways of building intensity and emotion. For the sound team, that meant the old formulas could not simply be copied. They had to listen differently. A microphone placement that worked perfectly for Neil's playing might not capture Anika's attack in the same way. The mix had to highlight the details that made her sound unique, the power behind her hits, the movement in her rhythms, and the personality in her performance. This is where the real pressure came in. Rush fans are some of the most dedicated music fans in the world. Many had followed the band for decades, studied every album, and knew Neil Peart's drum sound almost instantly. A small difference would be noticed. A missing feeling would be noticed. The engineers were not only mixing a concert, they were managing expectations. But there was also something working in their favor. Anika was not walking into the band trying to erase Neil's legacy. She openly respected what he created and understood the importance of those songs. Her role was to honor the music while bringing her own identity to the performance. That attitude changed everything. Instead of forcing her into a copy of the past, the crew could focus on capturing what made her special. And slowly, the biggest concern started turning into one of the tour's biggest strengths. The question was no longer, can Anika sound like Neil? The real question became, can Rush sound like Rush with Anika? And the answer depended on one of the most important parts of any live show, the connection between the drummer and the entire sound system. Because when thousands of people are watching, even the smallest adjustment behind the scenes can decide whether a performance feels legendary or unforgettable for the wrong reasons. Behind every great live performance, there is a team of people making decisions that most fans never see. The audience sees the lights, the musicians, and the energy on stage. But behind the scenes, sound engineers are constantly making adjustments, changing levels, controlling dynamics, and making sure every instrument reaches the crowd clearly. For Rush's return, that responsibility became even bigger. Because Anika Nilles was not simply joining a regular band lineup, she was stepping into one of the most recognizable drum roles in rock history. The engineers had to create a sound that worked in huge venues while still feeling authentic. A drum kit that sounds incredible in a studio can behave completely differently inside an arena. The room itself changes everything, the size, the reflections, and the way thousands of people hear each hit. And Anika's playing style added another layer to the challenge. Her strength comes from her ability to move between power and control. She can play with incredible intensity, but she also uses small details and rhythmic changes that give her performances personality. The crew had to make sure those details were not lost. If the mix was too focused on making the drums massive, the audience could lose the feeling and movement in her playing. If it was too natural and quiet, the songs might not have the same impact that Rush fans expected. Finding that middle ground was the key. The goal was to make the drums feel huge, but still sound like Anika. This is also why the choice of drummer mattered so much. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson were not looking for someone who could simply memorize Neil Peart's parts. They needed a musician who understood the emotional weight of the songs and could perform them with confidence. Anika brought that confidence. She had already spent years developing her own reputation as a drummer and educator, proving she had the technical ability and musical understanding needed for a challenge of this size. And as rehearsals continued, the crew discovered something important. The biggest problem was not replacing the old sound. The biggest challenge was capturing a new one. Rush had spent decades creating a sound that felt larger than life. Now, the engineers had to help create the next version of that sound, one built around a different drummer, a different energy, and a different chapter in the band's story. But there was still one final test waiting. Could Anika's unique approach connect with the fans who had spent years listening to Neil Peart? Because no amount of technical work could solve that. Only the performance could. When Rush finally brought the new lineup to the stage, the biggest test was no longer inside the rehearsal room. It was in front of the fans. For years, Rush supporters had built a deep connection with Neil Peart's playing. His drum parts were not just technical achievements, they were emotional moments that helped define the band's identity. That meant Anika Nilles was walking into a situation where every note, every fill, and every change would be carefully watched. But instead of trying to prove that she could be Neil Peart, Anika took a different approach. She respected the original performances while allowing herself to be the musician she is. And that choice helped change the conversation. Fans began noticing that the experience was not about replacing a legend. It was about celebrating the music while allowing it to continue in a new form. For the sound engineers, this was the moment they had been preparing for. All the adjustments, all the testing, and all the planning came down to one goal: making the audience feel the power of Rush again. The drums had to hit with enough force to fill the venue. The quieter moments had to have enough detail to show Anika's musical personality, and the overall mix had to make the band feel connected, because Rush's music depends on chemistry. A drummer is not just keeping time in Rush songs. The drums are part of the conversation between the instruments. Every section has movement, every transition has purpose, and Anika understood that. Her performance style brought a different kind of energy to songs that fans already knew by heart. Instead of copying every detail from the past, she brought a fresh perspective while respecting the foundation Neil created. That was the balance the engineers were searching for from the beginning. Not a replacement, not a tribute act, a continuation. And perhaps the most surprising thing about the challenge was this: the hardest part was never making Anika sound like Rush. The hardest part was letting Rush sound like itself while making room for something new. The crew's biggest challenge became their biggest achievement, proving that a legendary band could evolve without losing the identity that made people love them. But there was still one final piece of the story: the reason Anika's arrival worked when so many people doubted it ever could. In the end, Rush's biggest sound challenge with Anika Nilles was never really about microphones, equipment, or mixing boards. It was about emotion. It was about understanding that some parts of music are connected to memories. For millions of fans, Neil Peart was not just a drummer. He was a symbol of creativity, precision, and the spirit of Rush itself. So when Anika stepped behind the kit, the pressure was enormous. But what made the transition possible was that nobody involved was trying to rewrite history. Neil Peart's legacy remained untouched. The goal was to honor what he created while allowing Rush's music to move forward. That is where the sound engineers played such an important role. Their job was to capture a new drummer without hiding what made her special. They had to make the drums powerful enough for massive arenas, clear enough for longtime fans to appreciate every detail, and natural enough that Anika's own personality could come through. And that balance is what made the challenge so unique. A great sound engineer does not just make an instrument louder. They help an audience connect with a performance. They help a band's energy reach thousands of people. And with Anika Nilles, the crew had to help create a new version of a sound that had defined rock music for decades. The result was not a copy of the past. It was something different, a new chapter. Rush proved that a band's identity is not only built by one person. It is built by the chemistry, the music, and the willingness to evolve. Anika did not step on stage to replace Neil Peart. She stepped on stage to carry the music forward. And for the engineers behind the scenes, that was the real challenge: not recreating a legend, but helping a new voice be heard. Because sometimes the hardest sound to capture is not the sound of the past, it is the sound of what comes next.